Hola, ¿qué tal? Mi nombre es de Abel. Sorry, I'm just trying to revive my Latin genes. Not that I have some, but this thing right here is already giving you a hint that this is going to be a special video. But I want to talk about a couple of things. It seems like I'm going to be talking about locking out your lifts when you're doing squats and bench presses and other such pressing movements. But in reality, this will be just as much of a philosophical video as a technical one. By the way, yes, before anybody says that I look huge, I do. I'm not going to be showing you my midsection anytime soon, but damn, my arms look big. Yeah, I'm bulking like a madman. I am strong as hell, but definitely not my most aesthetics. Although I will say that I can do some interesting things with a little bit of pudge at this point. Not so little pudge on my stomach. I can have intimacy with it like I've never had before. Maybe at some point I did, but not in the last couple of years. So, I want to be talking about Mike Israetel's lockout technique on his lifts. Not because I want to criticize him. In fact, probably I will want to defend him much more so than criticizing him. But there have been a lot of discussions that I have seen, people commenting on his videos, questioning him, hey, Dr. Mike, why are you locking out your leg presses and hack squats so forcefully? I have seen Mike explaining calmly and politely why that is the case. I have seen him getting more and more agitated about that as time has gone on. What I'm actually hoping to do in this video is help everyone. So I will try to be a do-gooder. I will try to help Mike in actually understanding what the people are seeing when they're seeing his videos and are formulating these questioning thoughts in their heads and are writing the criticizing words that they write. Maybe will help him be a little bit less annoyed by everyone. And I will also try to help the people that are formulating these questions and these criticizing words in thinking about what other people do in terms of fitness. So I'm not going to venture too far from our topic. But I know that I tend to have these thoughts myself when I'm looking at someone else's technique videos or lifting videos and having my questioning thoughts regarding their lifting technique. I tend to have the same thoughts when I see what they're doing diet-wise. I tend to get pissy and annoyed because, of course, I do what everybody does. I go off of my own experience. And it can be especially just baffling when you see someone like Mike, who, as we know, has been lifting for God knows how long. He's very experienced, he's muscular, he's strong, he has coached a lot of people, he has a PhD for Christ's sakes. And still he does something which we just cannot quite make sense of. So I will try to clear that up as well. So for the beginning, I'm just going to give a brief outline of what we are even talking about here, because some of you might not be so in tune with everything that's happening within our little sphere of evidence-based fitness. So Mike Israetel has these lifting videos where he is doing leg presses, hack squats, also does free weight squats, Smith machine squats, but pendulum squats, hack squats, and leg presses are some of his favorite lifts, and you will see him performing these lifts quite frequently. And one thing that you will see quite often, and it's probably going to catch your eye if you're performing these lifts yourself, is that it seems like he's locking out his knees very forcefully at the top of the movement. And when you're looking at these videos, it can often seem like, wow, is this not dangerous? Is this not running the risk of breaking his leg backwards, like in some of these crazy leg press videos that are up on YouTube? I've never watched them. I'm quite a visual type, so just by looking at the video title, I can exactly imagine what must be happening there. People have asked Mike about this, so they asked him, Dr. Mike, is there a reason why you're locking out so forcefully? Dr. Mike, isn't that lockout dangerous? And as I said, Mike gave all kinds of responses, but he has also addressed this in several videos.
The human joint, in almost every case, is designed to lock out under load. Okay, this is totally fine, unless you have way too much weight in the bar you have no business of doing, or you slam purposefully and try to hyperextend your knees, but you're not doing that. Almost all people with any semblance of athleticism, as they come up, they reduce the velocity and then lock. They're not like jumping into the shit.
I think we can all agree, I think most of us do agree, that what Mike is saying about lockouts makes total sense. He's not advocating you to slam yourself into that lockout position and actually risk breaking your leg backwards. He's simply telling you that, okay, if you want, there's nothing wrong with simply locking out, resting a split second or two, and then initiating the next rep. You're probably a healthy person whose joints are perfectly able to handle locking out your joints and resist those isometric forces that are placed upon you in that position. Now, the issue here, and why I think these answers have not satisfied all the questioners, is that it actually doesn't quite address what people are talking about. I think when people are asking about the lockouts, they're not really phrasing themselves correctly. What are you actually trying to say when you're questioning Mike or someone else who is locking out like this? What you're actually seeing, and what I'm seeing as well, and why I'm wincing a little bit when I'm seeing these videos, is that it's not a lockout that you're questioning here. What you're questioning is actually that it seems like Dr. Mike is hyperextending his knee almost at the top of the movement. So he's locking out, and when he's done locking out, he's doing an extra couple of millimeters of movement with his knee joint and is slightly bending it backwards. When I'm just showing you a picture, it actually looks like a knee that's bent backwards slightly. You see the same thing with Charlie, with Jared. Maybe we could call them the hyperextension boys or something, or hyperextension squad, a bit more manly. But that's what's looking a little bit freaky about this. Now, I can guarantee you, I've never seen him say this explicitly, but I would be very, very surprised if Mike said that, yeah, I think there's nothing wrong with hyperextending your knee in the leg press. Someone just made this shit up. Hyperextension is perfectly safe. Just hyperextend away. No, maybe it would be worth explaining to people why you're seeing that, putting everything into context. And I will want to do that as well. But just before I do that, let's talk for a second about forceful lockouts, okay? Is that a completely normal and natural thing? I have two things to say on that. The first thing is that if you're able to lock out fully pain-free and there's absolutely no discomfort, then I don't see an issue with that. Actually, then I have three things to say on that. The second thing is that locking out is not a completely natural thing. That's what's always said, that your joints should be able to handle this no problem, but I feel like to some extent, that's an arbitrary statement, just as much as it is arbitrary to say that locking out is dangerous. It's kind of just something that we say because it makes sense, and people don't research this kind of stuff and don't think too much about this stuff. So off the top of your head, you're not going to be able to come up with anything that would refute that claim. But let's think about this for a second. In real life, in our daily activities, with everything that we do and what we would do if we were not going to a gym with machines and weight plates and all of that, would we be locking out pretty much ever? I would say not really. I mean, if you're thinking about standing up, what am I doing now? I'm standing, and actually, there is a slight bend in my knee. If you were to look at it from close, I can feel that my knee is not completely straightened out like this. There is a very, very slight bend in it. I'm not really cognizant of it. It's not really something that I'm noticing because it just is. It just happens. It's very natural, just like breathing is very natural. When you're standing up from a chair, you're not exploding into this locked out position like this. No, you're standing up and you're just standing on your legs in the way that is the most comfortable and the way you feel the most stable, perhaps. Since I mentioned stability, it's interesting to think about why don't we actually lock out like this when we stand up from a chair? Probably it's because of that, because you're not very stable in that position. Stability is something that we will need more or less of in certain situations. I think it's fairly safe to say that when you're holding with your legs straight out there, like 600 pounds, in a leg press, or when you're standing with 600 pounds on your back, or let's say like 300 pounds on your back with a back squat, stability is probably something that you do want. When you're not stable, bad stuff are more likely to happen. So much so that I have actually slightly hyperextended my knee while standing in the shower. I was standing there, just, tiptoeing around like I normally do. I straightened out my knee, and I don't know why, it was just this random little movement I did, and I slightly extended my knee backwards, and it hurt like hell. And for the next 2 weeks, I really needed to pay attention how I'm stepping around, because if I made a wrong movement, my knee would be prone to get into that position again and go into that hyperextension again, and it hurt like crazy. This hyperextension thing is really not cool for your knee, and it's not likely to happen if you're just standing naturally. And again, how are you standing naturally? You're standing with a very, very slight bend in your knee. Basically an imperceptible one, but it's not locked out. It's definitely not locked out. Now, does any of that mean that you should not be locking out? No, not necessarily. I'm just saying that this whole notion that you should be able to lock out completely pain-free, it's sort of an arbitrary statement. I think it depends a lot on your joint integrity. And I will say that from a lot of stuff that I have seen from Dr. Mike, it does seem like he has very robust joints, and especially like some of these hinge joints that he has. Some of the stuff that he's saying, like my elbows and knees start hurting just from watching it. That's not because of bad form or anything. No, it's I have more fragile joints than he has. I mean, that's just the way I'm built, and that's the way he is built. So it's completely okay if your joints can handle this, but if they are not able to handle it, we are not necessarily evolutionarily selected for tasks like that, because locking out is not a completely natural thing that we do in day-to-day life. It's probably not by accident that, a lot of people avoid the full lockout on not just squats, not just leg presses, but also on bench presses, overhead presses, because completely locking out your elbow when there's force pushing down on it from the top, it can actually hurt your joints. Now, since I'm talking about what's natural, what's not natural, and what we are and aren't supposed to be able to do pain-free, it's very, very insightful if you're looking at the free weight squat videos of Dr. Mike. Because there are two things that you will notice. The first thing is that this scary, forceful lockout thing that people are writing about, you don't see it there. At least you don't see it nearly as much as you do on the leg press and on the hack squat videos. It's, I would say, because the movement pattern itself resembles much more so what you would do in a quote-unquote natural setting. Squatting down and standing up, that's very much something that we are quote-unquote designed to be able to do without problems. Sitting in this little seat and, our hips are fixed and our torso is fixed and only our legs are moving and we are pressing out a huge amount of weight. I mean, that's a very artificial thing, which is awesome that we have this artificial thing, but you just don't naturally rely on your natural kind of movement patterns that are ingrained in your brain and that you're doing without even thinking about it. Now, I want to continue a bit on the theme of how well Dr. Mike's responses to these criticisms are able to clear up the misunderstanding. I already mentioned that it's not really addressing what people are talking about because he's talking about locking out, whereas what people are actually asking about is this seeming hyperextension that he's doing. Another thing that's kind of like talking besides the point and not really addressing the real issue or the perceived issue is that the two alternatives that Dr. Mike is proposing in his videos is you lock out, that's option one, or option B is that you don't lock out, but you keep your knees bent, basically keeping a bit of tension on the muscle. So this is what you would see from a lot of pro bodybuilders when they're squatting. They're actually not coming up fully. They're kind of keeping their quads in this semi-contracted position, even at the top, and then they descend back to another repetition. So sort of that's the other alternative that Mike is proposing. So either you lock out or you basically keep constant tension on the muscle.
Should you go down and then come up just shy of lockout and then come down and then come up? Or when you come up, should you go and lock your knees?
Whereas that's not really the two alternatives that we are talking about here, because there are three options in my mind. A, you lock out and you lock out like Dr. Mike. Like that is complete 100% locking out. Option B is the constant tension thing that Dr. Mike has mentioned. So you're not actually straightening out your arm or your leg, whatever you're working at the time. And then option three is that you're locking out, just not as much as Dr. Mike. Basically, in the case of a squat, you would arrive into a position in which you would actually arrive if you just stood up from a chair. And there are lots of examples of this. I will show you a clip from Steve Hall. Look at the way he is hack squatting. I would consider that locking out. I mean, he could rest there. Probably he could stand there for a minute without issues. His muscles are not active right now. There's no tension on the quads per se, or at least the quads are not actively contracting here. He's locked out. He's just not as straightened out as Dr. Mike is. Another thing that you can observe here, and this is actually a common thing to talk about, and even Dr. Mike is talking about it, is deceleration or lack thereof, okay? Steve Hall is very visibly decelerating, basically slowing himself down slightly just before he would arrive into that locked out position. That's what Steve is doing, and it's very clearly visible. Dr. Mike seemingly is not decelerating at all. He's going fast, 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 and boom, max speed into that lockout. That is a big difference because, if we accept that, okay, your knee is more likely to hyperextend when your knee is straight, right? Like from a bent knee into a hyperextended knee, it's very hard to go, right? When you're locked out, you could go into a hyperextended position if you wanted to. That is much more likely to happen if you go into that lockout at full speed, because it's much harder to then all of a sudden control yourself and stop that movement that is actually taking you in that direction, right? You go from bent knee to straight knee. I mean, the natural extension of this movement direction would be hyperextension, but you want to stop yourself just before that. Now, that's much, much easier if you slow yourself down just before you arrived in that lockout position. Dr. Mike, at least what it seems like, is not doing that. Now, again, I want to emphasize that's how it's looking like. Things can look one way on video, and they might actually be in a different way in real life. But I'm saying this to Mike much more so that this is what's visible to us on your videos, and this is why you're getting these weird questions. So, and again, Dr. Mike is talking about the fact that you should decelerate before you lock your knees out. So it's not like he's not aware of this, and I'm very happy to entertain the fact that he is actually slowing himself down. It's just for whatever reason, not what we see on his videos. Now, I want to talk a bit about what you're seeing on videos versus what's actually happening. And this is why I have this little sex toy looking thing here. That's not actually a sex toy. I just put this chain here, and for some reason, for the life of me, I cannot get it off. But that's another story. So I have gotten comments on my Instagram videos, YouTube videos, pointing out the exact opposite issue, and that is that I'm not locking out and that I'm not even close to locking out. And I've gotten that especially on my presses. So whenever I'm doing a chest press or a Smith machine bench press or something, I have gotten this comment from a lot of people that I am not locking out my elbows and I'm not even close to lockout. On the one hand, I know what people mean because, yes, to be honest, when I look at my videos, it does seem like I'm actually not locking out my elbows at all. They are fairly bent still when I'm finishing a rep. But what's actually going on there is that if I lock out my elbows completely, it actually hurts my elbows. Like even now it feels kind of weird completely straightening out my elbows like this. So what I actually do is sort of what I showed to you on the Steve Hall hack squat video. I am locking out, just I'm still maintaining that very, very slight bend. To me, internally, it's almost imperceptible, the difference between that and an actual full lockout, but it's just enough for me to actually keep my elbows happier. So this is what I'm doing. And this is why I brought this, because I actually want to show you. This is the extent to which I'm actually locking out on my chest press movements. Do you see my elbows? Because what you actually see is that it looks slightly bent. I could lock it out more and look at what's happening now. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the difference is almost imperceptible there. But let's say some of you with critical eyes will pick up on that. What I did there is completely meaningless from a muscle stimulation standpoint, but it's not insignificant from a joint comfort and joint integrity perspective, for me at least. And so I'm not going for that extra 1 millimeter of range of motion there. But I get it that when someone is looking at my chest press videos, it seems like I'm trying to somehow cheat the range of motion and I try to ego lift or something because this way I can handle more weight, which, by the way, it's actually pretty nonsensical when it comes to something like a chest press, because the hardest part of the movement and the range of motion is not up here, it's actually down near where the bar would be, say, touching my chest. So it wouldn't make any sense to try to cheat that part of the range of motion. Like, you could actually argue that it's easier if you lock out and you rest a little bit up there, but that's not even the point. The point is that what for me feels like a very comfortable, natural, full range of motion with locking out-ish, but just not 100% locking out, decelerating enough at the top, doing all of those things. For me, it seems like the perfect rep, sort of. And actually, part of the reason why I used to film these things is because this movement feels so good and so complete and so natural. From the outside, it looks pretty bad. I will agree with that. And this basically brings me back to the videos of Dr. Mike, and it also brings me to one of my most influential phrases that I've heard when I was much, much younger. So I'm just going to tell you a brief story about this. I remember arguing with a girl. She was a little bit older than me when I was, I think, 13 years old. It doesn't matter what we argued about. The point is that none of us could know for sure what we are talking about. she was probably more correct. And I was just explaining myself like in a super impassioned and overly confident way. And the girl was listening to me. And eventually she just said, oh, Abel, I'm going to say it in Hungarian because it sounds better. Jaj, Abel, ne legyél már ennyire kurva okos. And that in English would mean, Abel, just don't be so fucking smart, okay? And honestly, that's the phrase that I keep repeating to myself, either when I feel too pissy about something like Dr. Mike's videos, or when someone else is trying to be so damn smart in YouTube comments, for example. Like last week, for instance, there was a guy who was saying that the picture that I had in a YouTube thumbnail is me at single-digit body fat percentage. And I remember exactly when that picture was taken. In fact, probably I can dig up the video from which that little screen capture thing was taken. I was probably 20% body fat, if not more. And he was telling me that I'm single digit there, even though he sees like 10% of my total body, right? He sees my abs, my chest, and my shoulders. That's it. And he was also saying that now, so like 2 weeks ago when I recorded that video, I'm 22% there. That might actually be correct, but I can also tell you that on that thumbnail that you're seeing there, I'm probably the same exact body fat percentage as what you saw last week. Just the angle was different, the lighting was different, and it doesn't bother me that he thinks that I was single digit on that picture. What bothers me is just the confidence, you know, the confidence with which he is making statements about my body. I know that sounds funny, but my body, my freaking body fat, and he doesn't even entertain the fact that, okay, I have been just on YouTube for like 7 years. I have been lifting for longer than that. I'm living in this body. I'm seeing this body from different angles. I know how it feels. Maybe, just maybe, I have a better idea at what body fat I could be at, right? I could be still wrong, but just a little bit less confidence. That's what I would like to see in these arguments. And this is perhaps the biggest kind of lesson that I think we all need to take away from all of this, is that, yes, these videos of Dr. Mike doing things is, yeah, it looks scary. It looks a little bit freaky, and it looks like he's trying to push the limits of like how close he can get to hyperextension. Mike has been lifting for a very long time. He has lifted very, very heavy weight for very, very long. Maybe he has a better idea as to how close he is to hyperextension and how safe what he's doing is than we do. It could be that we are all right and he's wrong about this, but maybe that's not what we should bet on, right? So honestly, to me, that is the most important conclusion from all of this. I think keeping this mantra in mind for ourselves is going to be much more valuable than coming to the perfect conclusion over Dr. Mike's hack squat technique. When it comes to lockouts, probably I should say something about that as well. I would say that it's not required to lock out fully. The reason why this is a thing that is recommended generally, I think, has partly to do with powerlifting again and strength sports of that kind, where you need a defined endpoint to a movement, okay? So with a squat, for example, like there is a level of depth that you need to achieve, or the bench press, let's say, that's an even better example. You need to touch your chest, and then you need to lock out on top. And if you do lock out, then the judges know definitively that, okay, you have completed the rep. If you stop the rep earlier than that, then it would always be a little bit ambiguous, right? So for a sport like that, this is very important. If you're just lifting to get more muscular, I don't think that you necessarily need to lock out like this. I think just going, like ending the lift in a position that is the most natural and comfortable for your joints, that's perfectly fine. So yeah, folks, that's pretty much what I had to say on the whole locking out issue and lockout situation. Lighthearted video. Hopefully it was informative to you, but yeah, I think I'm going to end it there. Otherwise, please subscribe for more content like this, and check the video description for links as to how you can work together with me in various forms. And otherwise, I will see you in the next video.